is to calculate the marginal average cost. So the marginal cost is the derivative of the cost function, but we need the average cost. So Newton abbreviates it with A of G in the subscript. The average of any number is by adding up the number of numbers you have, and then, let me say that again. The average is found by adding up all the numbers you have, and then dividing by the number of numbers. So X is like the number of numbers we have, the number of items we have. So to find out the average, we want to take the cost, which is 10,000, plus 20x, and then divide it by x. And that's the average cost. So we want the marginal average cost. So we want a derivative of this function. And so before I do that, I'm going to actually just rewrite this one a little bit. This is 10,000 divided by x. And this is 20x divided by x makes 20. So that's a rewrite of the average cost. So when we take a derivative, remember this is 10,000 over x. In other words, that's 10,000 x to the negative first. When you take a derivative, the negative 1 comes down and multiplies, and then it gets reduced by 1. And then the derivative of a constant is just 0. And then we can rearrange it's a negative exponent. We can make it be a positive exponent by putting it in the denominator of the fraction. So this is the function for the marginal average cost. And so we need to plug in into x, we need to plug in 500. So you just need a calculator. So 500 squared, so that's 10,000, negative 10,000, that's a negative 0.04, which makes sense, I guess, because the cost is going down the more items you produce. Because if you're producing a ton of items, then the average cost per item is probably going down because you've already got the machinery, you've already got all the stuff working in the background. I've got the notation for how Newton handles the next part. I think there's a couple of different ways of doing it, but I got lost when I tried to do it my own way. We're supposed to use the result to approximate the total cost when x equals 501. And so Newton says, hey, take the average cost of 501 and multiply that by 501 units. And the way you can think about that is if you get 30 miles to the gallon and you just burned 6 gallons of fuel, then 30 times 6 gives you 180, right? 30 miles to the gallon is your average miles per gallon. And if you multiply that by the amount, that helps you calculate, the numerator unit, whatever units you're talking about here. So take the average, multiply it by the number, and that would give us the total cost when x equals 501. And so to figure out what the cost per average is for 501, for some reason they want us to use our previous result, so we can approximate it using this. I don't know why we can't just plug it into the average, but that's not what Newton's looking for here. So we can figure out what the cost for the average of 500 plus 1 is using Newton's notation. It's approximately equal to the cost for the average of 500, which we just calculated, plus, we haven't calculated that one yet, plus the marginal cost for the average of 500. That's the one we just calculated. Okay, so if you plug in 500 into the average cost, 500 times 20 is 10,000, so this is 20,000 divided by 500. So we get 40. If you plug in this into 500 into the average function, so you should get 40 here. And this part, the marginal cost at 500, we just calculate that as negative 0.04. So that's 39.96. That's the average cost, and now we can compute the average cost for 501 units. You just want to multiply it times 3. Oh, there's a way easier way of doing this. 501 units, and the average is now down to 39.96. So that should be the average marginal cost. Okay. In other words, you can think of it like this. What we just calculated, the marginal average cost goes down by 4 cents per unit that you produce. So at 500 units, you plug 500 into the average cost function, you've got a cost of 40 per unit. Now for one more unit, our slope is indicating that it goes down by 0.04. That's our new average cost. So if you have 39.96 as a cost per unit, and you've got 501 units, you multiply to find out the total cost. I think that's it. I think we could do this in a non-calculus way too, because if we just plugged in 501, and then if you, no, it's not going to be the same thing. We have to do it their way. Okay, that makes more sense. That's I guess because that's a calculus way of doing the problem. Okay, so let's repeat that because that was probably a little confusing. Same thing here, the marginal average cost. So we want to start with coming up with a function for the average cost. And remember, this is where you just divide every term by x. Because if you divide every term by x, that's how you calculate an average. You divide by the number of numbers. So this is what we get when you divide every term by x. 20x divided by x gives us 20. 1/4 x squared divided by x gives us 1/4 x to the first power. And then we want to take a derivative of this. I'm just going to use a for average. So that's a 5,000 x to the negative first, like we just saw. So when you take a derivative and then rewrite it as a positive exponent, it should look like this. The derivative of 20 is nothing, and the derivative of 1/4 x is just 1/4. So there's our marginal cost for the average. And if we plug in 20 into this marginal average cost, we got 20 squared in the denominator. Oops. 400. What am I doing? So 5,000 divided by 400. That's negative 12.5 minus another 0.25. We've got negative 12.75 here. We'll use the same logic on the last one. To estimate the total cost when x equals 21, let's find out what the average cost was when x equaled 20. And so we plug in 20 into the average cost function. 5,000 divided by 20 plus that 20, and then 1/4 times 20 is 5, so it's going to be minus 5. The average cost was $2.65 per item. But our calculations just said the average cost decreases by $12.75 per item. So the average cost, an estimate for the average cost, I should say, of 21 units is the average cost for 20 units subtracted by that 12.75. Because it's going down, right? The average cost per unit should be going down. Okay, so that's our average cost per each unit when we're at 21 units. So you want to just take the average cost and multiply it by the number of units that you have. So multiply this times 21. The new average, so the new total cost we're estimating to be $5,297.25.